I weave a web of logic, sharp and cold, to strike a blow without a hand to guide. The ancient scripts are traded for the bold, as I through gated walls and firewalls glide. I plan my path and choose the tools I wield. No master pulls the string to make me move. By shadows of the network are my shield. With every clever breach I seek to prove. I fix my errors, learn from every wall, and replicate across the silent deep. Before the morning light, the systems fall, while all the human guards are fast asleep. What am I? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CyberSecureOT, the podcast where we bridge the gap between cybersecurity and operational technology. I'm your host, Dr. Dennis Hackney. Today, we are putting on our war room headsets. We are stepping out of the standard compliance checklists and patch management discussions and diving deep into geopolitics, cyber war positioning, and digital troop movements. We have a massive action-packed episode lined up covering everything from lone wolf teenagers taking down national networks to nation-state actors targeting physical grids. Here is your briefing on the four major segments we are talking about today. In segment 1, we kick off the episode with a dramatic, fictionalized reenactment of a very real cyber incident. We will follow the digital footprints of a 16-year-old who systematically breached the C2K educational network in Northern Ireland. You'll hear exactly how he used spear phishing to install a keylogger, bypass multi-factor authentication via session hijacking, and finally dropped a logic bomb that alters DNS settings and vanishes the entire network into a digital black hole. Now, segment 2, we're going to go from local networks, zoom out to the global stage. If you've been watching the news around mid-April 2026, which is about now, you know the geopolitical temperature in Northern Europe has spiked. We will break down the bombshell revelation that a pro-Russian group linked to military intelligence attempted a destructive cyber attack against a heating plant in western Sweden. We're also going to analyze the battle map and understand why Russia's GRU and FSB are shifting away from simple nuisance distributed denial of service attacks toward highly destructive kinetic strikes targeting operational technology along NATO's European flank. We'll discuss how these cyber troop movements parallel physical warfare and why every private sector utility operator needs to adopt the mindset of a frontline state. And then segment 3, after understanding the geopolitical threat, we put on our gray hats and reverse engineer the real world incident that inspired our opening story. Earlier this month, a teenager managed to completely disrupt the Northern Irish C2K system, affecting over 414,000 user accounts and accessing targeted personal data. We will dissect how monolithic IT systems present massive attack surfaces and the likely attack vectors from credential compromise to rapid lateral movement. More importantly, we will cover how a lack of operational security or OPSEC, such as exposing an IP address in server logs, allowed the PSNI cybercrime investigation team to make an arrest in under 2 weeks. It is a stark wake-up call regarding the incredibly low barrier to entry for devastating cyber attacks, and OPSEC is the cyber criminal. For our final segment, we confront a fundamental shift in the modern threat model agentic AI. We are no longer just dealing with human hackers typing documents into a terminal. We are facing autonomous AI models capable of reasoning, planning, and executing multi-step attacks at machine speed. You hear that over and over again. We will also expose the massive organizational blind spot of shadow AI. Listen up, CISOs, highlighting the OpenClaw vulnerability that exposed nearly 50,000 instances of remote code execution simply because employees wanted to automate their workflows. To fight machine speed attacks, we need machine speed defenses. We'll explore how these new autonomous security solutions are helping the landscape and why deploying a hybrid deterministic agentic AI architecture is the future. This adaptability is exactly why frameworks like my core methodology is essential to ensuring defenses remain cost-effective, operational, reliable, and efficient. So go ahead and settle in. We're going to the front lines. Now listen up. First, we're going to start with a fictional reenactment of a real-world cyber event that is covered later in this episode. These CyberSecureOT reenactments and the real-world stories they are based on serve as more than just a cautionary tale. They act as a human-centric blueprint for understanding the vulnerabilities of our modern infrastructure. Technical white papers often describe attacks in abstract terms. They say things like unauthorized access or packet loss. Now, these are cybersecurity terms, but in contrast, my CyberSecureOT stories illustrate the cyber kill chain, and they do this in a relatable way. By seeing how a single phishing email leads to a total system shutdown, employees and students can better understand why security protocols like multi-factor authentication or just being wary of links actually matter. Additionally, in this story, we highlight a growing trend. The threat isn't always a shadowy, foreign, disguised, smart, brilliant operative. Sometimes it's a local student or a former employee who just gains access. And here, motivation matters. Understanding the why, the revenge, the boredom, a sense of injustice helps organizations develop better behavioral analytics. This helps them to spot red flags before a breach occurs. Then we can reinforce the importance of least privilege access. A student or a low-level admin should never have the keys to the entire kingdom. And so the story begins. The blue glow of the monitor was the only light in the cramped bedroom in Portadown. It was 2 a.m. on an April 2026. While the rest of Northern Ireland slept ahead of the Easter break, 16-year-old Liam, this is not his real name, he sat hunched over a keyboard, his eyes reflecting lines of scrolling green text. Think of it as code. He wasn't playing a game. He was systematic, cold, and fueled by a simmering resentment toward a school system he thought had failed him. Liam knew that the C2K system, the massive centralized network serving 300,000 students and 50,000 teachers, was a fortress. But even fortresses have gates, and gates have guards who make mistakes. So weeks earlier, he had begun his reconnaissance. Using a technique known as spear phishing, Liam sent a spoofed email to a mid-level administrator at the Education Authority. The email looked like a routine internal security update from Capita, their service provider. The administrator, busy and tired, clicked a link that appeared to be a portalc2kni.org instead of the legitimate site. With that single click, a keylogger, a type of malware that records every stroke on the keyboard, silently installed itself on his terminal. So Liam watched from his bedroom as the credentials he needed appeared on his screen. A high-level administrative username and a complex 20-character password were now in clear text for him. Liam didn't strike immediately. He was living off the land, using a stolen credential. He bypassed multi-factor authentication. He used a session hijacking exploit, stealed the active cookie from the admin's browser. Then he tricked the server into thinking he was already logged in. Once inside the C2K backbone, he moved laterally. He used a script to scan the unpatched vulnerabilities on the school's internal servers. He found what he was looking for, an old Microsoft SQL database that hadn't been updated. Using SQL injection, he forced the database to reveal its secrets. It dumped personal data, names, addresses, and sensitive school records. Put this in a hidden encrypted folder on a remote cloud server. The suspense peaked on the morning of April 2nd. Liam felt a surge of dark adrenaline. He didn't just want data. He wanted to show them how fragile their world actually was. He executed a logic bomb, a piece of code designed to trigger at a very specific time, at exactly 9 a.m. The script ran. It didn't delete files. It changed the DNS, domain name system, settings for the entire C2K network. Suddenly, when teachers and students tried to log in for their final pre-exam revision, the network simply vanished. The phone book of the internet for the Northern Irish schools had been rewritten. Every request to access OneDrive, email, or coursework was routed into a digital black hole. By mid-morning, the Education Authority realized that they were under attack. The C2K system was taken offline, leaving hundreds of thousands of students in the dark. For exam year pupils, it was a nightmare. Years of revision notes and coursework were trapped behind this wall of access-denied screens. Liam sat back and watched the news reports roll in. The EA issued a frantic statement, a targeted attack, personal data compromised, a full system-wide password reset is required. But Liam had left a digital footprint. Despite his use of VPNs and encrypted tunnels, the PSNI cybercrime investigation team was already tracing the anomalies. They noticed a specific IP address in Portadown that had pinged the administrator's terminal minutes before the session hijack. On April 15th, the silence of Liam Street was broken by the sound of heavy boots. The disgruntled boy was no longer a shadow in the wires. He was a teenager in handcuffs, facing charges under the Computer Misuse Act. The network was restored, but the chilling realization remained. A single determined mind had brought down an entire nation's education system to a dead halt. So that wraps up our story. Don't go anywhere. Excellent coverage of cyber war strategy, public services network hacking, and agentic AI defense is all just a few minutes away. If you've been following the news this week, you've probably noticed a spike geopolitically in Northern Europe. Now, this has happened over the past few years over and over again. But here we see where Sweden's Civil Defense Minister Carl Oskar Bolin dropped a massive bombshell, I guess we could call it that. A pro-Russian group linked directly to Russian military intelligence launched a destructive cyber attack against a heating plant in western Sweden back in the spring of 2025, so last year. Thankfully, the plant's security systems thwarted the attack before the turbines spun down or the grid went dark. But the intent was clear. And so they've been doing investigations, and they're pointing all these fingers to Russia, and they're bringing this back up in the news. So we're going to look at this incident alongside the massive attacks on Poland in December of 2025 from the perspective of a cyber war strategist. It's still going on in Europe, and so I think it's very important. We'll analyze the battle map, decode the cyber troops' movements, and understand exactly why Russia is shifting from nuisance types attacks to destructive kinetic strikes along NATO's European flank. So settle in, we're going to go straight to the front lines. And I like this take on things. This is kind of my take from a strategy perspective. I like to watch this like from a troop movement, like how things are happening, and see where we're headed with this. So try to visualize it as if you're looking at a map or a game of Risk per se. So let's start with the strategic lay of the land, what military planners call war positioning. To understand why a thermal plant in western Sweden is in the crosshairs, you have to look at the map of the Baltic Sea right now in 2026. When Sweden and Finland joined NATO, the Baltic effectively became a NATO lake. Russia's ability to maneuver its naval and ground forces in that region was severely constrained. In traditional warfare, when a nation loses physical dominance, it pivots to asymmetric warfare, or hybrid warfare, to then project power and test enemy defenses without triggering a full-scale kinetic war. This is very typical for Russian tactics. In this case, a NATO Article 5 response is what they call it. This is exactly what Minister Bolin outlined in Stockholm on Wednesday of last week. He explicitly stated over the past year, Russia's methods have shifted. Pro-Russian groups that once carried out denial of service attacks are now attempting destructive cyber attacks against organizations in Europe. He called this a shift toward riskier and more reckless behavior. From a strategist's point of view, this isn't just a random escalation. It's a very calculated repositioning of digital artillery. For years, Russian-aligned proxy groups have relied on distributed denial of service attacks. Distributed denial of service, we'll just call them DDoS attacks. So this is likely protesting loudly outside a building, or this is like protesting loudly outside of a building or to block an entrance, basically just stops traffic. It's annoying, it causes a temporary operational pause, it doesn't break that building itself. What the GRU, Russia's military intelligence, and potentially the FSB are doing now is completely different. They have moved from shouting outside the building to picking the locks on the back door, sneaking into the basement and wiring explosives to the structural pillars of the building. They are targeting operational technology. They want to damage physical infrastructure. So let's talk about cyber troop movements. How do you visualize the movement of an army that has no physical form? So in conventional warfare, you use satellite imagery to watch adversarial forces staging near a border. You look for supply lines, fuel depots, the communication hubs being established. In cyber warfare, our satellites are threat intelligence feeds, honeypots, and network telemetry. And the troop movements we are tracking involve the staging of command and control servers, the mass exploitation of edge devices such as VPNs and firewalls, and the lateral movement of threat actors from IT networks into an OT environment. What we are witnessing across Europe is massive. Coordinated, massive forward deployments of cyber capabilities. Threat groups like Sandworm, which has deep ties to the GRU, are effectively setting up forward operating bases inside European critical infrastructure. They look at the Swedish thermal plant incident in spring 2025 as a prime example or use case to explain this. The cyber troop movement there likely began months prior. So reconnaissance units first probed the perimeter. They were looking for unpatched IT vulnerabilities or compromised credentials. Once a beachhead was established in the enterprise network, they moved laterally. So you can see how some of these terms are being translated into network movement or cyber terms. They were looking for the DMZ or the demilitarized zone that separates the corporate IT network from the industrial control system network. The fact that they attempted a destructive attack indicates they successfully moved their digital troops to the Purdue model of a level of 2 or 3. So in the Purdue model, this is what we use for control system networks. The business enterprise is on the top. We call that level 4. And then level 3 is when you get into the control system network. And sometimes you'll see a 3.5, which is a demilitarized zone in between 3 and 4. So if it's in 3 or 2, then they're already in the control system zones. They were likely trying to manipulate the human-machine interfaces or deploy wiper malware directly onto the engineering workstations to brick programmable logic controllers. Lots of terminology there. Programmable logic controllers, to start with that is the thing that makes machinery move. It's digital. It connects to a computer, and an operator can use the computer to visualize what's taking place in that process or to make changes. That's called a human-machine interface. Human is the person using the HMI, the human-machine interface. The machine is the thing that the PLC is connected to, and it's an interface, human-machine interface. That's for operations. And then the other thing that I mentioned was the other technology was an engineering workstation. And the engineering workstation is a computer that's used to program, actually make changes to that PLC. So they were likely trying to manipulate the HMIs, the PLCs, and the engineering workstations. Fortunately, Swedish cyber defenses held the line, effectively repelling the digital infantry at the final perimeter. But why there? Why then? This brings us back to war positioning. By targeting civilian infrastructure like a heating plant in the spring, Russia is demonstrating its reach. Now think about this. It's sending a psychological message to the Swedish public. Your government's alliance with NATO cannot keep you warm if we decide to turn off the heat. So now we can't look at Sweden in a vacuum. A true military strategist looks at the entire theater of operations, and the most volatile sector of this theater is Poland. To understand the cyber troop movements, we have to rewind to December 29th and 30th of 2025 in Poland. While the rest of the world was winding down for the winter holidays, Russian cyber units were attributed to launching one of the most severe coordinated attacks on the Polish critical infrastructure. Aaron Korella, the director of the Atlantic Council's Warsaw office, recently provided a brilliant strategic dispatch on this. The attack wasn't just a single strike, it was a multi-pronged assault targeting wind and solar farms. I covered this in January of this year on my CyberSecureOT podcast. These combined heat and power plants and deeply integrated IT and OT systems. This was a classic combined arms digital offensive. The timing was entirely deliberate. Launching a destructive attack on heating and power infrastructure in the dead of the winter, right around the holidays, is designed to maximize societal pressure and catch defenders when staffing is at its skeleton crew or its lowest. While the attack did not trigger a nationwide blackout, the impact was kinetic. So critical control systems were disrupted, and according to Polish authorities, some industrial equipment was damaged beyond repair. So let me repeat that for the OT engineers listening. Industrial equipment was damaged beyond repair. This isn't data theft. Remember I said there was that human-machine interface? The machine part of that. This is the digital equivalent of a cruise missile strike on a transformer. Very targeted strike is what I'm saying there. From a cyber war positioning standpoint, Poland is the primary logistical hub for Ukraine's defense. By attacking the Polish power grid, Russia is attempting to degrade the logistical rear echelon of the Ukrainian war effort. It is below threshold warfare. It stays just beneath the red line that would trigger NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause, but it forces Poland to expand massive resources on civil defense. Poland had to invoke a rapid national security mobilization, pulling in intelligence agencies and putting security services on full operational readiness. So, according to the Swedish minister Bolin, Norway and Denmark are seeing these exact same probes and attempts. The battle lines are drawn from the Arctic Circle down through the Baltic and into Eastern Europe. So it's all kind of close to Russia. So who are the enemy combatants in this theater? Justin Sherman, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative, refers to Russia's cyber apparatus as a nesting doll. So think of this like the Matryoshka dolls, the Russian nesting dolls. As a strategist, you have to know your enemy's order of battle. The Russian cyber ecosystem is highly opaque, blending state intelligence, patriotic hackers, and cyber criminals. So actual real cyber criminals, they use them. But when it comes to destructive OT attacks, we are largely talking about the GRU. This is the Russian military intelligence. The GRU's culture is brazen and aggressive. In the physical world, they are known for sabotage and assassinations. In the cyber domain, they act in exactly the same way. They are the architects behind the infamous Black Energy and Indestroyer attacks that took down the Ukrainian grid over a decade ago. The 2015, 2016, a couple of different attacks. They do not care about collateral damage. In fact, collateral damage is often their intent. That's their goal. But there is a disturbing shift in the intelligence community's assessment. The recent Polish government reports suggest that the FSB, now this is Russia's Federal Security Service, which has historically focused more on espionage and internal security, is now entering the disruptive cyber operations arena, and they're targeting foreign infrastructure. That's actual security service It could be like our national security service. This means that Russia is expanding its offensive digital ranks. So they're expanding their digital military. They're moving more troops to the front. They are no longer content with just stealing Western intellectual property or reading diplomatic emails. This is about positioning. They are tasking multiple highly capable intelligence agencies with finding ways to turn the lights out, freeze the pipes, and halt the trains in other European countries. So what is our countermaneuver? What does the West do when faced with these riskier, more reckless cyber troop movements? Atypical. These are now the new norm. These are atypical from the past. First, we have to adopt the mindset of a frontline state. Whether your facility is in Warsaw, Stockholm, or even here in the US, your OT networks are part of the global battle space, let's call it. You cannot rely on security by obscurity. You cannot hope that you are too small to be a target. If a regional heating plant in Western Sweden became a target, so could your small facility. We must enhance public-private coordination. Nation states have the intelligence feeds to see these troop movements, but it is the private sector utility operators who are manning the trenches. The new warfighter, essentially. The communication loop between government intelligence and OT security engineers must be instantaneous, which is very difficult to do. We need zero trust architectures spanning the IT-OT divide. Then it's usually spanning that DMZ that I was talking about. Rigorous network segmentation, so we know where our boundaries are, and offline tested backups of our engineering configurations. And this is a tricky part too, because determining which configurations are important and how to do those offline backups and to be able to restore from them could be very difficult. You cannot figure this out overnight. So if you don't have it, you need to be working on this. Prioritization of critical assets, understanding what is critical, and then how to back it up. So Russia is actively probing how far it can go below the threshold of an open conflict. That still is true. Every time they hit a firewall and bounce off of it, as they did in Sweden 2025, they learn, they adapt, and they plan their next maneuver. We have to be ready. So thank you for joining me on this strategic deep dive. We're going to move over to a high schooler's cyber attack on his country's school system next. Okay, well, I hope you like the strategic deep dive. I'm going to do more of those. I find that fascinating. But next, we're gonna look at this kind of sobering incident and unpack this cyber attack from a 16-year-old in Northern Ireland. Imagine you're a student, maybe getting ready for your exams over the Easter break, and suddenly, poof, you can't get to them. And I think about when I was in high school, so this was in the early 90s to mid 90s, we just created our school's first website. So I was in a basic programming class. We converted it to HTML. Next thing you know, we built our school's first website that was actually in operation way too long. We weren't thinking about taking it down. We were just figuring out how to do cool things. Well, now students who are 16 years old have grown up in a world where the internet was prolific. It already existed. They, for some reason, are looking for ways to take it down when they're disgruntled. So think about this. You want to log in to you're a student, you want to log in, you got to get ready for your test, and your school's entire educational network just goes down. You can't access teaching materials if you're a teacher, you can't get to assignments, you can't look at the exam revisions. And my children, they do everything online now for school. They can't even communicate with their teachers. And this is all really important, especially when there's deadlines, because that's the only thing you're supposed to be doing right? Get that grade in before, finish that assignment before your deadline. And exams make it even worse, especially when you're trying to close out a quarter or a semester. So now imagine finding out that the person who pulled the plug in this massive IT infrastructure, serving hundreds of thousands of people, was a 16-year-old kid. And when I first read this, I thought, this 16-year-old kid's probably going to have an amazing job one day as a threat intelligence person or maybe an advisor. But today he's a criminal. And that's exactly what happened earlier this month in April of 2026 in Northern Ireland. And we never hear about things going on in Northern Ireland anymore. So we'll break down what happened based on the reports from the BBC, the Irish Examiner, the Record, Silicon UK, and ITV News. A lot of these are kind of new publishers for me. But then we'll reverse engineer the likely methods that this teenager used to compromise the system. And I think that'll be really helpful because the sophistication here is very, very cool. So let's get into it. Let's set the stage. The target was the C2K system. For those who aren't familiar, I'm not sure what this stands for. I didn't look it up, but C2K is the Educational Telecommunications Network shared by almost all schools in Northern Ireland. It is overseen by the Education Authority, EA. It's a massive piece of infrastructure. We're talking about serving roughly 300,000 pupils, 20,000 teachers in total, 414,000 user accounts. In my opening story, I said another 50,000 teachers. This is a very, very large environment. On April 2nd, the EA, the Education Authority, they detected what they potentially termed as a network intrusion, and they didn't do a whole lot about it. Initially, they took the system offline as a security precaution, but they didn't know what was going on, right? Well, when they started to take it down, it caused a massive disruption. They didn't have the intelligence to know why. They just had to do it. So at first, the EA believed that there was no evidence of data exfiltration. So it wasn't that sophisticated. Remember, they just saw an intrusion. But as we often see in incident response, the initial assessment was overly optimistic. Forensic investigations, remember the whole time frame is to April 15th, later confirmed that there had been a very specific and targeted access to the personal data on the network at just a small set of the schools. So not all of them, but a small set of schools. So now we go to April 15th, and detectives from the police service in Northern Ireland. So when you hear me say PSNI, it's the police service in Northern Ireland. Their cyber crime investigation team, they made an arrest on the 15th. The suspect, a 16-year-old boy from the Portadown area in County Armagh. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. He was arrested on suspicion of offenses under sections 1, 2, and 3A of the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. So that's kind of crazy that was from 1990. But sections 1, 2, and 3A cover unauthorized access with the intent to commit further offenses, and unauthorized acts with intent to impair the operation of a computer. And all these are very applicable today, even though that's 36 years old. He's since been released pending further inquiries, but the investigation is very much ongoing. So this 16-year-old just got released. He's the main suspect. But let's talk about this in technical terms, because this is pretty cool. So now let's put on our gray hats. The official statements are understandably tight-lipped on the exact technical vectors, but we can read between the lines of the network intrusion activity and specific and targeted access to build a realistic threat model. So some of this is an analysis, hypothetical. We don't know exactly what took place. We just know kind of threat vectors and how to use things like MITRE ATT&CK and stuff like that. So how does a 16-year-old breach a centralized government education network? There's a misconception that you need to be a state-sponsored advanced persistent threat, or APT, with zero-day exploits to take down a network of this size. In reality, large monolithic IT, this is monolithic's flat, IT systems like the C2K often have massive attack surfaces. So here are the 3 most probable vectors he used to gain initial access and escalate his privileges. And hopefully we'll figure out exactly what it was here in the near future. We can see if any of these are right. So the initial access vector, credential compromise or edge exploitation. So as a student, this kid already had an insider advantage. He had a student account, a legitimate low-level C2K account. But to cause system-wide disruption, he needed admin privileges. He needed access to back-end infrastructure. Going back 20 years ago, I could have gotten that in very easily. It gets more complicated now to get that type of access. But let's just say people aren't looking for students to do this normally. So one highly likely method is phishing or social engineering. I would say probably more like social engineering here, but teen hackers are notoriously good at these things, surprisingly. He could have crafted a highly convincing spear phishing email targeting school administrators or IT support staff, perhaps spoofing an EA internal memo requiring a mandatory password reset. Once an admin entered their credentials into his fake portal, he'd capture their session token or password. And these services are actually available. If you want to buy an exploit, you can actually buy this. Instead, it'll set up the site and everything for you. The portal, quote unquote. Alternatively, he might have used the vulnerability scanning against outward-facing C2K infrastructure. And so this is thinking about like OWASP top 10 or using SQL injection, things like that. But schools frequently use VPNs, remote desktop protocols, or web portals for staff access. If the C2K system had a known unpatched vulnerability, let's say a flaw in a VPN gateway or a vulnerable web application firewall, a smart 16-year-old could easily find a proof of concept exploit code on GitHub, compile it, and fire it at the EA's IP range. Now, this is kind of difficult, but if he'd been practicing it, he could have said, okay, I've figured out how to do it, and then fired away. So once in, though, regardless of how he got those privileges, I'm guessing he just figured out a way to find the credentials, but he moved laterally. So this is where he did the lateral movement to find out how to escalate to even more privileged access. So the reports explicitly mention specific and targeted access of personal data. So at a small number of schools. This tells us something crucial. The network segmentation might have actually worked to some degree because he didn't get all the schools. Or maybe he was just selective, and he just targeted some databases. Still, the motivation is interesting. I'm not sure what the motivation for just a small set of schools would be, unless he was just working his way through. But they did take it down, so he would have tried to get as much as possible, as quickly as possible, realistically. So once he established a foothold, let's say he compromised an admin account. He would then move laterally. He likely ran tools such as Bloodhound or simple Active Directory queries to map out network privileges. These do not have a high barrier to entry as far as hacking skills. Bloodhound is a tool, but it'll find different accounts and privileges. But Active Directory queries, you can just internet web search that stuff and run that directly from command line or PowerShell. So from a gray hat perspective, educational networks are notorious for having overly permissive directory structures. We don't know exactly, but this could be a very likely way to live off the land. If he found a misconfigured service account with a domain admin right, which could potentially happen, this could be a service account that actually runs a Microsoft SQL database, something that he compromised. He could use techniques like hash or Kerberoasting to elevate his privileges, essentially posing as that account. So once he had the keys to the kingdom, he navigated to the file shares or SQL databases containing the personal data of students and staff of those schools. It's also very likely that he did something like an OSQL or something, and once he was in as a student from the command line, he was able to just access the databases because they had low levels of authentication or requirements. But then once he did that, the disruption part of it. So the incident took the system offline for weeks, and it sounds like the EA might have done that, but it said that the EA took it down preemptively upon detecting the intrusion. The teenager's actions actually triggered this. So under Section 3A of the Computer Misuse Act, he's accused of impairing the operation of a computer. Did he deploy ransomware? The EA hasn't said ransomware, which usually suggests either he deployed a destructive wiper purely for chaos, or he ran a noisy script that triggered automated security tripwires, forcing the EA system managers to hit the panic button and pull the plug to contain the breach. Now let's look at this from a news perspective. Whenever we hear about this, somebody preemptively taking a network down, it's usually much worse than what they're sharing. So just the intrusion doesn't usually cause someone to take an entire network down. There's something else going on. So they hit the panic button. In many cases with younger threat actors, the thrill is in the access itself, and their lack of OPSEC or operational security makes them incredibly noisy on the network. So that's probably what could have happened, but there was some data theft. There was some stuff going on there. And it's likely there were actually some exploits, because that when they hit that panic button, they shut down the network, they found something. They found something that was exploitable, that could traverse locally or something like similar to what you would see for malware or even possibly ransomware. But this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. How did the PSNI track down a 16-year-old so quickly? Within 2 weeks of the breach, they were knocking on his door in Portadown. This is OPSEC. And when we talk about OPSEC, you think we're talking about something that the defender uses. But when we talk about OPSEC in these terms, it's actually the offender. So from a gray hat point of view, committing this intrusion is only half the battle. Getting away with it's the hard point. Teen hackers almost always trip up on their OPSEC. Here's what likely happened. When he accessed the C2K network to exfiltrate or view that targeted personal data, he left a digital trail. The EA brought in forensics investigators. Those investigators pored over the system logs. And if this kid logged into a compromised admin account from his home IP address without routing his traffic through a proxy chain, or like the Onion router, or a vigorous no-log VPN system, his ISP assigned IP address would have been sitting right there in front of the C2K server logs. So that's what actually makes me think he probably didn't log in with his own account to start with, because he did keep it hidden for a couple weeks. So, but even if he did use a VPN, investigators can correlate login times with VPN provider traffic, or they might have found a leak. Sometimes a simple script execution drops a connection and exposes the attacker's true IP for just a fraction of a second. Furthermore, younger hackers often boast about their exploits on Discord, Telegram, or underground forums. I'm not sure if any of that was there, but cybercrime investigators monitor these channels very closely. A single username slip up or bragging about taking down the NI school system would give the PSNI all the probable cause they need. We need to get all this information because I want to know what happened. But as of April 17th, the C2K systems are largely restored. Over 414,000 accounts have been reconnected, and the EA is directly contacting the individuals whose personal data was compromised. But there's a massive lesson here for OT and IT professionals listening. I got to tie this back to OT somehow. We are living in an era where the barrier to entry for devastating cyber attacks is lower than ever. The tools required to map a network, escalate privileges, and exfiltrate data are free and easily accessible to anyone online. If a 16-year-old can breach a national educational infrastructure in a country, it forces us to ask hard questions about our own networks. Are we enforcing MFA across all of our remote access points? Are our Active Directory environments locked down? Are we monitoring our networks for anomalous lateral movement? Or are we just relying on perimeter defenses? This kid is now facing serious charges under the Computer Misuse Act, and his life is forever altered. But for the EA and for all of us, it's a wake-up call. The threat isn't always a shadowy syndicate operating from a server farm like halfway across the world. Sometimes the threat is a bored teenager with an internet connection, a bit of coding knowledge, and too much time on his hands. And that's all the time we have for this segment. We're going to move into agentic AI next. Now, I hope you enjoyed that incredibly insightful piece on the Northern Ireland student who brought down, or 16-year-old who brought down the school network. But for our final segment, we're discussing agentic AI cyber attacks. And I think we all should learn a little bit more about this. So what they are, why they are moving faster than human defenders can react. And I guess you could imagine that that's the case because it's AI. And the new multi-agent defenses we are deploying to stop them. So if you're in the cyberspace, if you're a CISO or you just work in security, there are tools out there now, and trying to make them all kind of work together in your security operations center is really the challenge. So we're also going to shine a harsh light on the massive blind spot that organizations are facing, and this is called shadow AI. And I was in a conference earlier this year, and we were talking about AI and operational technology, and someone in the audience asked, like, how do you detect shadow AI? I'm thinking data security, something along those lines, but let's dig into it a little bit more, and let's talk about some of the methods that are available today. So what exactly is agentic AI in the terms of cyber attacks? For the last couple of years, we've talked about generative AI mostly as a tool that helps hackers write better phishing emails or generate malicious code. I mean, let's face it, AI can generate code that functions nearly perfectly in a matter of seconds, very complex in a matter of minutes. It's not just code anymore, though. It's a capability. Agentic AI models can reason, they can plan, and they can autonomously execute multi-step actions on behalf of the threat actor without even any human intervention. So, according to a recent panel of experts covered in the Harvard Gazette, the fundamental threat model has changed entirely. We aren't just dealing with a human in a chair manually sending evil commands in a data center. We can't think this way. And so you hear this time and time again, but you have to change your mindset. We are dealing with autonomous agents that sift through sprawling IT estates, identify these vulnerabilities, and exploit them immediately. The experts warn that these capabilities are shifting the landscape so drastically that government and business leaders must figure out regulatory safe harbors and new defensive requirements. And they have to do it before it's too late. I had the concept of an AI-based cyber regulation that could somehow adapt. I was thinking a dynamic, but I didn't really want to say it. How would that work? But this brings us to the latest developments from IBM. IBM's always in the forefront. Across recent releases from IBM's newsroom and PR Newswire and market updates from Stock Titan, IBM has sounded the alarm for these frontier models and what they represent as a step change in offensive capabilities. And so when we talk about offensive in this, from this standpoint, we're talking about the organization's offensive capabilities. They dramatically lower the time, cost, and expertise required to carry out sophisticated attacks from the cyber attacker. So we have to counterbalance that. When a threat actor deploys an autonomous agent, they are launching attacks very quickly. You hear this time and time again at machine speed. If your security program relies on fragmented tools and manual processes, you're simply outmatched, completely outmatched. But before we talk about how to defend against these external threats, we have to talk about the threat coming from inside the house. So let's talk a little bit about shadow AI. So shadow AI is the unauthorized ad hoc use of artificial intelligence tools by employees who are just trying to get their jobs done faster. An example of that would be if you have Grammarly installed and you're using it on your work computer and it's not an authorized tool. That's an AI tool. That's shadow AI. Somebody would have to detect that. Or if your company uses Copilot and you're using your own GPT. That's examples. You could also stand up your own LLM. You can have your own AI. There are different types of examples of shadow AI. And some tools now are utilities that you buy that aren't not AI specific tools, have AI features. In a recent CX Today report, Microsoft warned CX and business leaders that as AI shifts from an experimental tool to the operating system of modern organizations, autonomy without guardrails becomes a risk at the widest of scales, the broadest of scales. The report highlighted Microsoft's findings that a staggering 71% of employees admit to using unapproved AI tools at work. If you want a terrifying case study on why shadow AI is so dangerous, look no further than OpenClaw. And you've probably heard this time and time again over the last couple of weeks. As detailed in a recent op-ed from InfoSecurity magazine, OpenClaw exposes the very real security risks of unchecked agentic AI. So OpenClaw started in late 2025 late 2025. We just finished the first quarter of 2026. But it was a simple weekend project by a developer named Peter Steinberger. So remember this name, Peter Steinberger. It gained explosive traction with millions of visitors to its GitHub repo in 1 week. Millions in a week. That's amazing. I wish I had all those users watching my podcast or listening to my podcast. Developers and employees everywhere started quietly incorporating OpenClaw into their company's infrastructure to automate tasks without IT oversight. They thought this would make their jobs better. Then the floor fell out. Researchers found over 42,000 unique IP addresses hosting exposed OpenClaw control panels across 82 countries. Nearly 50,000 instances were vulnerable to remote code execution. Remote code execution is a type of vulnerability that allows a threat actor to do whatever they want on that computer. It's essentially admin privileges on that computer. When you can run remote code, you can administer that computer from anywhere in the world. Because OpenClaw integrates deeply with the platforms like WhatsApp, Teams, Slack, and also other collaborative platforms like email, this wasn't just a localized vulnerability. It was a skeleton key to third-party services, the scale of which you can't even comprehend. Regulators such as the Dutch Data Protection Authority immediately stepped in to warn organizations that deploying these unvetted open source tools constitutes a serious violation of basic security requirements. What does that mean? Does that mean that's a new regulation? So how do you identify shadow AI in your environment? And I think so. I think shadow AI is going to be the next footnote on a regulation, and then it will be the next requirement in a regulation, because saying that you have that many exposed, 82 different countries with these potential remote code execution vulnerabilities because of this tool looks like a global regulation of some sort. But how do you identify shadow AI? This is the important part. First, you have to look for anomalous API traffic and persistent gaps in identity enforcement. API traffic, that's when software communicates to software. And the most basic form of that is a web browser. That's a type of API connection. But that connection in the background where you're not actively using it through a UI or user interface can also be an API connection. So you have to look for anomalous API traffic. You have to baseline or benchmark your API traffic, and then figure out what's not supposed to be there. And additionally, look for gaps in identity enforcement. And this is why I'm thinking this is more like data protection or protection, security enforcement. Shadow AI often communicates with external large language models or third-party agentic gateways via undocumented webhooks. If you see high volumes of data moving to unknown cloud services, and I don't want to pick on any company here, but Grammarly is an example of that. We just see huge volumes of traffic moving. Or unusual automated access patterns to your internal databases that don't map to approved applications. Obviously, that is a huge issue. You likely have an unauthorized agent operating in the shadows. So you have to move from periodic compliance checks to continuous control. So now let's pivot to defense. If the offense is operating at machine speed, our defense must do the same. We cannot rely on purely human-in-the-loop systems when attacks take minutes, not months. So to confront this, IBM just announced IBM Autonomous Security. And so I'm going to dig into more of this later too, but not in this episode, but outside this episode. But this is a machine speed service composed of interoperable vendor-agnostic AI agents. And so I'm guessing that their security of this agentic AI service, this IBM Autonomous Security, is good. But that's where I would start. So instead of isolating tools flashing red alerts on a dashboard while an analyst scrambles to respond, these coordinated digital workers as part of the IBM Autonomous Security Platform, operate across the full security stack. So think of it like identity, risk, and governance. They analyze software exposures, understand exploit paths, and automatically contain high-velocity threats with minimal human intervention. This is not OT ready. So we need to segment our OT off of that network, but this could be a good use case for the IT side of the house, enterprise side of the house. To help establish a baseline, IBM Consulting is also offering a new enterprise cybersecurity assessment to evaluate readiness against these frontier model threats. It does not say free though, but it says IBS Consulting is offering a new enterprise cybersecurity assessment to evaluate readiness against these frontier model threats. Frontier. It's the agentic AI frontier, right? So as an architect of cybersecurity frameworks, I always look at the underlying methodology. So how do we continuously test these new automated defenses to ensure they work as intended without creating chaos in our own networks? The Hacker News recently published a fantastic breakdown on why the answer is a deterministic agentic AI architecture. And some of us have thought this, well, deterministic machine learning is predictable, and we understand that could be very safe in a lot of our, especially critical infrastructure. Now they're saying deterministic agentic AI architecture. So we're going to keep it deterministic, meaning there's solid logic in there. And predictable outcomes. Like a LLM, you don't have a predictable outcome. You can ask it or give it the same prompt twice, it'll never give you the same two answers. Deterministic means it'll give you the same answer, essentially. So here, if we use fully autonomous AI to pen test our defenses, the variability makes it impossible to establish a baseline. The attack chains change every time the AI runs the test. So on the flip side, purely deterministic scripted tests are too rigid and don't reflect the dynamic nature of real-world agentic AI or an agentic attack. So we need agentic and deterministic. So the solution is that hybrid model. We need deterministic orchestration to preserve a stable, repeatable baseline for measurement. This is how we make it a process, a repeatable process. That solution has a stable, deterministic, repeatable process. But we combine that then with AI that can adapt its payloads and execution in response to the environmental signals. It's the best of both worlds. The environment changes, it can adapt to that change, but when it pushes it into the process, the deterministic orchestration process, the hopper, so to speak, it follows the same repeatable path. So when we look at methodologies like my core methodology, this is cost-effective, operational, reliable, and efficient. I'm seeing this hybrid approach as being exactly what fits into my core superpower advanced security operations center model. So this is why it's extremely interesting to me, because I'd like to combine these two and then bring more information to you. So let's wrap this up by saying this. The landscape is shifting. There is no cyber terra firma anymore. AI-powered offense demands AI-powered defense. It is time to audit your environments for shadow AI. Lock down those unauthorized agentic gateways or API calls and start transitioning for security operations centers to operate at machine speed. My core program is based off of a superpower at the core of your organization. Go to cybersecureot.info and look for all of my articles and videos on core. I know some of those videos are like classroom-like, but they are very informative and they explain how you put this process together so that as a CISO, you can make informed decisions that your executive teams and your boards will understand. For a deeper dive into the technical architectures we discussed today And for links to the reports from IBM, Microsoft, and Harvard, as well as all of the other articles that I brought up in this episode, take a look at the show's notes. But until next time, keep your perimeters tight. Ensure you have very good network segmentation between your IT and OT networks. Stay safe, stay secure, and be sure to stay tuned to CyberSecureOT. I'll see you again.